Right. Dyani White Hawk, thank you for joining us. My name is Joe Williams. I'm the Director of Native American Programs at the Plains Art Museum, and I'm here today with Dyani White Hawk. We're going to talk about our new exhibition, She Gives, and just have a conversation with Dyani on her process and the show. So Dyani, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Would you be able to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background, please?
Sure thing. Well, as you said, my name is Dyani White Hawk. I am Sichangu Lakota through my mom, member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and German and Welsh American through my dad. I am predominantly a painter. My studio practice, I think, is rooted pretty strongly in painting, but I've as you see in this show, work in a variety of mediums. And so I'm a visual artist based in the Twin Cities area. I have a studio practice in Minneapolis. I live in Shakopee, Minnesota. Grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I've moved around quite a bit. Went to Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. I spent time in Kansas, and then went to the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I got my BFA, back to Madison for grad school, and then I've been here in the Twin Cities full-time since 2011.
So in that time you've been, in all this time you've been very busy with schooling and your career, and the exhibition of She Gives at the Plains Art Museum, I believe, is your second solo exhibition. Is that correct?
Second solo museum exhibition. So I've had a few solo gallery exhibitions, but yeah, this is the second solo museum exhibition. So thank you for
wonderful. That. Yeah. And I believe that this isn't your first works that you've shared with us at the museum. We've had you in the past, but certainly this is the first time we've done a solo exhibition with you in our space.
Yeah.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about the concept of She Gives and its relevancy to sort of the social awakening that's happening in this era that we're in right now?
Yeah. Well, I can definitely speak about the concept of the show and then specifically of the title. I think its correlation with a kind of social awakening happening right now isn't necessarily plotted or planned on my part, but I'm grateful for the momentum that's happening now from a collective, group of artists and people really committed to social justice. We've got a wave of growth, I think, happening in our country and our world in that. In regards to that right now, but that foundation has been laid by the previous generations. So I think that I'm a product of it, not necessarily plotting and planning to correlate. Like, I didn't set out to necessarily make a giant political statement, but the work can't help but be that. Just because of my existence and my life experiences and who I am and where I come from and natural responses to things that our communities have been faced with and continue to be faced with. So I really make work that is reflective of my life experiences, as related to our personal history, our family history, our tribal history, and how that's related to our national history and artistic histories. And so it can't help but be political. It can't help but align with those movements towards growth and hopefully better human relations at large. So it's not necessarily, I find it to be an interesting question in the way that it's aligned, because I felt like I didn't know how to answer specifically how or why, and just that to me it feels I just feel like I'm a product of it, so it can't help but be anything but, if that makes sense. But the exhibition at large, the title is called She Gives. And the title uh, basically is, it reflects upon the collective group of works that each individually in various ways speak to the generosity of spirit and labor, gifting, nurturing, caretaking, etc., that Indigenous women specifically, but women and feminine relatives at large, give to support our existence. It's meant to pay tribute to the legacy of these gifts, to impress upon the audience the necessity to see, recognize, and understand the value and worth of Native women, communities, our art, our wisdom, knowledge, gifts, and contributions to our human relatives, and to also extend this recognition of the female, of the feminine, and all that it does to give and support our existence and our health and well-being, but to extend that beyond human attribution and to honor and celebrate the gifts of our collective mother, the earth, the land. So She Gives is really meant to call out all that she, all that feminine, all that those feminine forces do to support our livelihood, our health, our happiness, our well-being. And it, so each body of work in some shape or each series within the exhibition, because I didn't start the series with this exhibition in mind. It's that, each of these pieces, each of the series collectively are speaking towards kind of the same goal of that honoring and recognition of our women, and all that they give and do and impart upon us. So yeah, that's what She Gives is all about, and kind of impressing upon the audience to recognize that and to honor that and to really own the recognition of that value and that worth.
I think that's wonderful. Going through art school and art history courses, especially with the Native American art history, you hear so much about the male artists throughout the 20th century. And I remember they sort of went a little bit into, say, Dorothy Dunn down in Oklahoma, teaching Oscar Howe, who taught many after him. But much of, at least of the Northern Plains tradition, was really started by female artists teaching other artists down there. And it's a shame that we haven't focused as much in history with female artists as we have with male artists. And I think,
and a lot of my painting practice really comes out of responding to that, responding to the lack of recognition of what our women and relatives have done to contribute to artistic history. And it's just so overlooked. And those contributions are tremendous. And it's just not talked about in academia in the way that, our kind of mainstream art history is taught. Native folks are overlooked for the most part, kind of put into a separate wing, put into a separate portion of the history telling. It's a whole nother class. It's something other than, which is just completely false, because the way that that our national artistic history is involved was in tandem with and in relationship with the art that was already happening on this continent before they were telling this mainstream art history context. And so those histories are inseparable. And so, but the way that we tell those histories, we separate it, and it's not the truth. So a lot of my work serves to kind of really push people to think about how that history is being told, and look for ways to recognize and start telling those stories in a more truthful manner.
In the exhibition of She Gives, one of the series within there is called Takes Care of Them. And it's 4 wonderful prints that we're excited to be able to share with with community. Would you be able to speak a little bit about this series?
Yeah. So the series, excuse me, the series collectively is titled "Takes Care of Them," um, and again, it's about for this series, it's specifically about Indigenous women and Native women, and for me, it's, you know, the aesthetic is very specifically Lakota, just because it's coming from me, but it's meant to recognize, you know, our women across the board, not just the Lakota women. Um, but each of these, they are um, abstracted, but not abstracted. They're abstracted maybe in their form, you know, or they're reduced, I guess, maybe is the better uh, way to explain them, because they're, you know, they're reduced to this kind of simplified bodice dress form, but they reference dentilium dresses, plain style dentilium dresses, traditional dresses. And they're made in collaboration with and at the High Point Center for Printmaking. And I went in and I didn't have the plan to make this suite of dresses was not my original plan, but it evolved through playing and experimentation of the process. So in my sketchbook, I had kind of the yoke design, which is the upper portion here of the dentilium shells around the below the neck area that's on the top of each four of these forms. I had that pattern sketched out in my sketchbook for years, and I had intended on making a painting that was going to highlight that general form. My paintings, you know, you'll see in other paintings within the exhibition and throughout my career, I've, you know, done a series of paintings that have utilized this repetitive line making that mimics simultaneously porcupine quill work, lane stitch beadwork, and dentilium. That's something that I've used since 2010. But so I went in and I thought I was just playing with the forms of printmaking because it's very different than painting. And I pulled out this sketch and I was like, I think I want to play with this form in printmaking. And so I started it off, and it was just the cropped top square portion basically of the yoke. And as I was playing with it, you know, I kept telling them, I was like, I feel like I need a little bit more of the background color that the yoke would be sitting on. Trying to get the right composition and the right balance. And I was like, I think I need a little bit more of it. Maybe it needs to be a little bit longer. And progressively it changed. I was like, you know what? It just needs to be body size. It needs to be like full size. I need to feel like I could step into it. It needs to be a dress. Like it needs to be the whole thing. And I didn't set out to do that, and this probably is some of the most direct work that I've done in a long time. So a lot more of my work is more highly abstracted. It's not so representative of the things and the art forms that it references. And once I got the first one going, I felt like the idea for the project at large started really kind of revealing itself. So I got this first one going, and I was, you know, kind of starting to come to terms with what I wanted this work to be about. And once I did that, and I picked like the colors that I was going to focus on first, then after I had told them that I needed it to be body size, and which is really hard to do in printmaking. These prints are extremely challenging to do. I really set the folks at High Point up for a lot of work. I'm so grateful that they were willing to play with me. But once I got that down, I was really thinking about this concept, and I was thinking about the individuality that is represented in each of these four forms. I got to thinking about the way that our women, the various ways that our female relatives take care of us, the various ways that and that's not the same for every female or feminine relative. Um, it, they embody different characteristic, different ages, different roles, different ways that they nurture us, different ways that they care for us. And so I started thinking about, um, I can't remember exactly how it came to, but my mom is a veteran, and I started thinking about how um, in some of our ceremonies, we'll start off, or they'll ask veterans to stand at like 4 veterans to stand at the 4 cardinal directions to kind of hold that space and protect that space while the ceremony is taking place. And when my mom was uh, actively dancing in the Palo Circle, she was part of the Oneida Nation Color Guard, and she was among the first women that were asked to be a part of that color guard. And she was the first woman that was asked to carry the Eagle staff for a year. And so that transition was, within her lifetime, within my lifetime, where, our women veterans, at least in like the service, US service, weren't quite as actively recognized as our male veterans. And that's really changed. You see a lot more women out carrying flags today at the Palos, in Palos, and that's really honored much more now than it was even when I was younger. But I started thinking about that idea of protection, and that idea and recognizing the fact that our women have always been doing that, whether or not it's been actively recognized in a particular practice. They're always doing that. And it comes in a lot of different forms. And sometimes it's active service. Sometimes it's just by being the protector of a household, by, always being there. Sometimes it's simply by, holding down a home no matter what those challenges may be, getting food on the table, going to work, whatever that is, like I was raised by a single mom, and the majority of the people who have raised and nurtured me in my lifetime have been women, have been really strong Native women. And so that is why there's 4 dresses now, as I was thinking about that, kind of an extension of that idea. And so after I figured out that the one needed to be a full dress size, and I turned to Cole and I was like, so there also needs to be 4 of them. He's like, we'll see. He's like, let's get one done first and then see what happens. And I was like, okay, but eventually there'll be 4 of them. Because I felt like they needed to kind of uh, hold a collective front in the gallery together, whether that's, that they're installed like in the 4 cardinal directions, or installed as a collective kind of guard along one wall. I wanted it to be the recognition of the collectivity of the way that we're raised and nurtured, and it's not just a single solo idea, right? And then they each have their own individual titles, both English and Lakota titles. And the titles are not a one-to-one translation. Like they don't necessarily line up. Woaha Kunkia is the blue one, and its English title is lead. And so the concepts are related, or they're related in the way that I understand the word lead when I'm thinking about it in relationship to women and Native women in our communities. This is kind of the concept that I'm thinking about in Lakota. And so the titles are kind of aimed, they're related, but for Lakota people, I'm talking about a particular concept. And then for folks that aren't familiar with the language or even new to learning the language, this is what I'm thinking about when I say lead, is this greater concept of people who teach us our practices, people who teach us how to be good relatives, people that teach us our ways. So they each have these titles: lead, nurture, create, protect, and they're Lakota titles as well. And they're all individually adorned. And I think about them in regards to, they all have their own personality. So you could go to a powwow and you'll see, they'll call out, women's Northern traditional or women's Northern cloth, and they'll all come out and they'll all have the same style of dress on, but they're all completely unique, right? And so the individual adornment of each screen print is meant to kind of recognize the individuality of, even within a particular tradition. So when I was making them, I see them even as different ages and specific personalities. So that blue one, lead, that's our unchi, that's grandma. It's the kind of the most like old school in its aesthetics, in kind of like the evolution of even the ways that like a particular tradition changes over generations.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that, our 16-year-old dancing in the powwow circuit is going to make her dentilium dress is going to look very different than the way that one that you'll pull out, and go visit in the collections in a museum that was made in the late 1800s. The dress, the foundation is still there and you can recognize it immediately, but stylistically it changes over time, and then from person to person, and even the symbolism that person brings into their dress and how it's individualized. And so the blue one, that's why she's the lead, because she's the grandma. And then create, the gold one to the right, that's I think of her as like the youngest, like maybe your really young auntie or your cousin or your older sister, and she's the most blinged out of the crew, the most up to date, I guess, or the most current. She's got her extended ribbons off the edges, which has been really it was something that's pulled from the past, but it's made, it's been really popular lately. And then she's just kind of really highly adorned, and she's on a really bright, it's gold, but it's kind of meant to represent that yellow mustard wool. And so she's super creative, or she's, kind of meant to embody that person, that personality. And then the green one is protect. And so the dragonflies that are along the bottom edge of that one, there's, stories within our community about the role of dragonflies and how that relates to this concept of protect. And that one I think of as like your older auntie, or your she's more middle late age, in that role. And so she's, more adorned than lead, but still, fairly modest in her approach. And then the red one is nurture. And for me, the reason the red one is nurture is because my mom's dress is red, and I associate that with her. And I think about the ways that I've learned of what nurturing is, and the strength that it takes to do that, and to do it well, and to raise a healthy, happy individual. And I associate that with that color and with her. And yeah, so I see them kind of all having different ages, different roles, different personalities, yet they're all related, and they all kind of collectively come together to take care of individuals in our communities.
It's a beautiful series, and to see it in print or on screen is one thing, but to see it up in person is something else. At the museum, in our collections, we actually have one from the late 1800s, and when these prints came in, I was absolutely struck. by the ribbons on the bottom of your prints,
Mm.
because the one that is in our collections has something very similar. And it's really worth taking some time to look at. So, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
The moment looking at that.
We worked really hard to actually, like, to have this balance of them owning their screen printness, but really paying tribute to the materials that they're referencing, so making it feel like a ribbon, and having the feeling of the ribbon as different from the feeling of the ink behind it, which is rendered in a way to kind of feel like those deep wool colors. And the brass tacks or the sequins or the references to they're all printed differently, so that each of the materials feels like its own individual element, just like our dresses. We bring together all of these different elements to create this piece. And so yeah, we put a lot of thought and intention into, it's not just colors printed on, it's different different kinds of ink, different kinds, there's foil, different approaches to printing the ink, different, it's just a wide variety, so that you can have a similar feeling to when you're looking at a dress that's, a collection of elements. So I'm glad you responded to in that way, and, kind of get those immediate references.
Oh yes, no, it was quite a moment. Moving on, within the series, we have one I Am Your Relative photo installation. And I'm going to share this up now. If you could speak to this series.
So these are, this is a series of photographs that are, again, printed in near life size, that will be displayed in the gallery in the same orientation that you see them now. And they're actually printed front and back, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But this piece, the title, as you said, is I Am Your Relative, and it actually came from a performance piece that was done a couple years ago. I was asked to speak at a fundraising event for an organization called Global Rights for Women here in Minneapolis that does really important work around the globe, fighting for, raising funds for, and doing, really hard and important work for women's rights. And I was asked to come and to speak at this gala, and about the epidemics of violence against Native women, and I said no, because I'm a painter. I was like, there are people doing really direct work on this topic that have things that need to be talked about, things that need to be heard, and there are other people that can fill that role better than I can. And they kept persisting, and I kept saying no. And eventually, and I told them at one point, I was like, oh, I'll think about it. And I got on a phone call again. I was like, I just really don't think I'm the person for this. And they eventually said, Dyani, we've thought really long and hard about this. You're the person we want to come. So please just think about it more. I was like, oh my gosh. All right, I'll give it a little bit more thought. So I went out for a run that day. And as I was running this, I was thinking about, they gave me 7 minutes on a stage to talk about this topic. And 7 minutes isn't going to do justice for this topic. The epidemic of violence that our women have faced across time and that are facing now because of the forces of colonization is tremendous. You can't summarize it in 7 minutes and give it any justice. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, what the hell am I going to say in 7 minutes that's going to do this topic any good? And I was like, and how are they even going to listen? They're going to be at a fancy gala. They're going to be, distracted. They're going to be eating dinners. They're going to be thinking about all these different things. What am I going to do with 7 minutes? And so I was thinking about it, and I was running, and I was thinking, well, we need to create impact, and we need them to really tune in and listen. And so this performance piece came to mind, and I thought we could do this performance piece, and then I'll give a short talk afterwards, summarizing some of the statistics that our communities are faced with right now. And so I recruited and asked my friends and relatives to come and help be a part of this performance. And these are not the original t-shirts, but I hand printed the original t-shirts for this piece, and each of us wore our ribbon skirts and our moccasins and these t-shirts. And before we took the stage, we all lilied really loud, and everybody, the whole place, it's not a native gathering, it's just a gathering at large for this to support this organization. And so everybody just hushed. They didn't know what was what was taking place or what was going on, and the whole place just dropped silent. And then I asked each of my friends and relatives to take the stage one by one. So my daughter is the one on the far left that is in the I Am t-shirt. So she went out first, and she held the stage by herself for 5 seconds, silently, just in her t-shirt that says I Am. And then we had a pause in between each one, 5 seconds. And then my friend Sasha came out and joined my daughter. So then it read, I am more than your desire. 5 seconds. I am more than your fantasy. Jenny joined. Then Leah came up. I am more than a mascot. And my sister Huni came up. I am ancestral love, prayer, sacrifice. And then it was me in the performance, but we've recruited Kaina for the photos. I am your relative. And then during the presentation, then the four in the middle fell back, and then me and Nina, after that, we all turned around, and on the back reads all of our tribal affiliation on the back sides of the t-shirts. So then you're reading, I am more than your desire, you're more than your fantasy, more than mascot, ancestral love, prayer, sacrifice, your relative. We all turn around, and it says, Dene, Apache, Lakota, Quetzan, Dakota, Ojibwe, Dene, Dakota, and everybody's tribes on the back, so that you have your associating indigenous nations with the individuality of these women, and the fact that they are more than all of these thoughts that men may impose upon our women. And then we all turned back around. The four people in the middle fell back, and me and my daughter held hands on the stage, and it just says, I am your relative. And I talked about, and then we all introduced ourselves, and I asked them all to introduce themselves, their names, who they are, what their passion is, what they do, so that people would also have one more element of recognizing their humanity and what they contribute to our communities. And then I talked about the statistics of violence against Native women, how high those statistics are, how much higher they are than the rest of the women in our country, what our communities face, and then talked about the idea of Mitakuye in Lakota worldviews, this idea and fundamental understanding of our relatedness, and how important it is to recognize our relationships to one another, and that the health and well-being of one affects all. And when we are not treating each other as relatives, when we're not taking care of each other as relatives, if we forget to, if we ignore, if we put aside, and we're not imparting the same value on a particular group of people. If I associated that idea with, if we look at our animal relatives, if one of, people who, or animals who travel in herds, if one of their relatives is kind of left off to the side and not being cared for, not being looked after at the moment, ignored, that's the relative that becomes the perfect prey. Predators can see that. Predators, prey on those moments, those opportunities. And in a lot of ways, that's what's happening to our women in our communities. Our women are not highlighted. They're not talked about. We're not in the we're not in the news, we're not in the media. Native communities are often not included in statistics of all sorts of things, because we're considered statistically irrelevant. So even in research that is talking about effects of whatever they may be talking about, whatever the topic is, when they're going over underrepresented communities, Native people are almost always left out. And so when we're not at the top of mind, when the realities even of our national history is not taught in schools, and people don't understand the ways that affects our communities, it's mommy's on a call, sorry. That's my girl. It's we're not a reality, we're not real, therefore we're not protected, we're not valued, you can't. And so this piece is meant to call out and to impart upon an audience to recognize our relatedness, and to express how essential it is that everyone treats everyone else as an important part of our human family, and that right now Native women and Native communities are not being treated as such, and therefore our communities are really suffering. So that's a long story. I could go on a little bit longer, but I think we don't have time for all of that. We should probably move on. But
no, it's a wonderful sentiment. It reminds me. I'm Dakota. I'm from Sisseton-Wapiton, and I'd always had heard the phrase, especially before ceremonies, Haumidakuas.
Mm-hmm.
They're all related, and it's something that I think is so important for us to the core of where we come from.
Yeah,
and it's good that this is being talked about. This is being displayed like this. So wonderful, wonderful piece.
Thank you.
Within the series, we have the Listen video series coming up here. And this is something that's, I think, new, very new, and pretty exciting for myself. I'm a videographer in a past life, and so it's exciting to see works like this. Share it here. Would you be able to talk about this, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Oh, I want to go back for just a second, and because I want to recognize the fact that, I mentioned I'm predominantly a painter. My studio practice is founded in painting and beadwork and quillwork and all of those art forms. But for these latest bodies of work, for the I Am Your Relative body of work, I worked with fellow artist Tom Jones, Ho Chunk photographer,
okay.
And dear friend, and he did the photography for that series. I'm not a photographer. And so leading into the next body of work that we're going to talk about, Listen, I collaborated with another friend, Rizal Benali, who is a filmmaker, and she is Lakota Ndine as well. Because I'm not a filmmaker, but I had an idea, and luckily I have friends and relationships to collaborate with to build those ideas out. So you want me to just talk about this series?
Yes, please.
Okay, this series is titled Listen, and it will be in its first iteration at the Plains Museum, and it will be 8 TV monitors installed in the space with 8 separate videos looping on each of the monitors, and one of them is playing on silent on the screen now. And this particular series, let's see here, where do I want to start? I was thinking about, sometimes it's really hard when we get to thinking about all of the issues that our communities, that Native communities deal with and are faced with, the way that we and our relatives are really on a daily basis up against, fighting against generational trauma, the legacies of colonialism, and what that's done to our communities. And at times it feels suffocating, and you see the effects of when you think about something like the effects of meth on our reservations, or the topics that we were just talking about, the violence that's happening against our relatives. And there's so many things that our people have to deal with on a everyday living basis. And you can trace the reasons why that thing, diabetes, like, oh, there's so much, and you can draw the lines out, and why, those things are happening, and what's going on. And when you think about those things, sometimes sitting in my studio, I feel like it's impossible. It feels the task of healing our communities and the personal contributions that somebody can make towards that healing sometimes feel impossible or overwhelming. There's times where I've been sitting in my studio and I'm like, what the hell am I doing to help wielding a paintbrush alone in my studio? But at the same time, I know that it is about collectivity, and we all are given certain gifts, and we're all given certain roles, and we are all able to collectively contribute. And when we really focus on and nurture and grow into those roles and grow into the gifts that we can give, we can contribute, and so thinking about those tasks, one of the tasks is not the right word, thinking about that subject at large, one of the things that Native artists are faced with within the arts field is, we've really struggled for recognition and a real ongoing inclusion, celebration, applied value and worth of the work that we produce by people outside of our community, like within the mainstream, larger national and global arts field. We've gotten very little support. And one of the reasons I think that is because so many curators and decision makers and people within the field, they see our work and they can't read it. They don't understand it, because the vast majority of Americans and non-Americans have not been educated on Indigenous history. They don't know the full history of our nation because they're not taught it in schools. And so oftentimes when a curator looks at our work, they can't see all of the embedded or coded information that's within that work, because the knowledge, the history, the signifiers, they're not in their memory. And so oftentimes you have a curatorial visit with somebody and you have to start from scratch and give a whole damn history lesson before you can even get them to the current topic of the piece, and why it's important right now, and for them to really see and understand and grasp and be like, oh, I totally get it. And so it's just this daunting task of forever having to start from point A before you can even get into the grit of the current conversation. And that's the case with anybody doing any important work, so our folks who are, making their way in, making real inroads into government, they're faced with the same thing. Yes. People who are in the medical field, people who are in sciences, anything, people who are in education, anything. We have to educate everyone before we can even get into the real depths of the current conversation, and that's so hard. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, how can you even chip away at that? It feels impossible, because we don't have control of the education system. So how can we change that? And so when I was thinking about that question, and I was like, how do you educate a whole damn nation? I don't know how, I don't have an answer for that. But I thought, well, maybe you could start with an opportunity for people to even recognize that there is a gap in their knowledge, that there is a gap in what they've been taught, that there is, that tremendous gap of information is there. Like most folks don't even know. They have no idea that they're missing that information. And I thought, well, I can't really, it didn't feel like I could make a painting about that. And so I thought, well, if we could provide an opportunity for people to even have a moment of epiphany of what is missing, maybe that's a start. Maybe that's a place to start. And so these videos are, my friend Roselle and I went into 8 different communities and interviewed 8 different Native women speaking their indigenous languages on their indigenous lands. And the videos are about 5 minutes long each. And each woman is speaking in her language. This particular video here is of Rosemary Lujan. She's, we're in the Taos Pueblo, and she's speaking Tiwa. And, excuse me, sorry. And we're not providing translations for what they're speaking about, but what we're doing is providing an immersive opportunity for people to stand within a gallery and see 8 different indigenous women speaking 8 different indigenous languages. And then there's layering in those videos of the land, not only behind the women, but also Roselle has done video editing where the land is layered over top of them as they're speaking, and so you get to hear the language and have it associated not only with an individual, but with the land that particular language is from. And so the idea is that the language outside of the didactics that go along with the piece talk about the fact that, as Americans, most adults can walk down the sidewalk and probably just by sound identify, I'm guessing, upwards of 12 to 15 languages just by sound. Even if you don't know a single word, you can hear it and be like, that's Spanish, that's French, that's German, that's Italian, that's Portuguese, that's Japanese, that's Chinese, that's Somali, that's, and especially depending on where you live and what the, newer immigrant populations might be in your city or wherever you're at, by sound, we can identify a great amount of languages, but none of them are from here. And so this particular installation is meant to introduce the sounds and cadences of the languages from this land base, and to kind of immerse an audience in a small sampling of those sounds, of those cadences, of the languages that are from here that people can't identify for the most part if they were to walk into a room and hear them spoken, which is absurd, right? So to provide, there's 8 of them in this scenario. We want to grow. We're hoping to continue to find funding, and I'd like this installation to be upwards of at least 20 monitors at some point, so you can create a really immersive experience. 20 languages is still a small sampling of the indigenous languages here, but it's enough to create an opportunity for people to be immersed within, to start to be introduced to the sounds of a particular language. And then to have those sounds associated with an individual, with a human being alive today, and the geography of that land base from which that language is born. Yeah, so that's what Listen is all about.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm so excited to get into that space with all those videos there.
Thank you.
And walking that space. I'm really excited about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the show on. big thanks to you and Laura Youngbird. And I'm really excited to see the show once we're able to be in the space again.
Yes, it's the world we're in right now.
Yeah.
My final question is about what sort of advice would you have for college students, in a sense, or for young people to create relationships with galleries and museums, and how to gain resources to sustain studio practices?
Mm. Seize every opportunity, I guess, is my first thought in response to that. For college students, there's internships, do them. There's assistantships, do them. There's anytime you can begin to build a relationship, those relationships and the networking that comes from those relationships is really the foundation of your career going forward. Those are the beginning building blocks. So and that looks different ways for different people, different scenarios. But when you can start to build relationships with people in the field, that's really going to be the foundation for your opportunities going forward. And you have to, for me, I think it's really important to, there's strategy to that, right? Like when you take on an internship, or you take on a job, or you take on an assistantship, or whatever that may be, where you're starting to build relationships with people that have decision-making capabilities in galleries or museums. There's strategy in that for your own career, but I think it's really important that when you do that, you recognize that that's a relationship, that they don't owe you anything. But if you go in there with the idea that you can learn, and that they are willing to spend their time with you to impart that knowledge and impart that learning, and you recognize the gift that's within that, and you want to reciprocate that gift, and you want to reciprocate that relationship and really contribute what you can, then you're building the foundation of good relationships going forward. And that will impart be reciprocated back to you in the future, and they'll recognize and see you as a valuable person in the field, a valuable person, a valuable young person who can continue to do good work going forward. People know and recognize, and when they're passionate about the field, about an area, you want to impart knowledge to younger people because you want the field to continue to grow and to thrive, and you want folks to carry that torch after you, right, or alongside of you, or sometimes you just need help, right? Like,
Yep.
So I think that being strategic in your choices is important, but I think you really need to do it with a solid value system that's guiding you, that it's not just like, I'm doing this because it's advantageous for me. It can't be just, I'm doing this to climb a ladder. I'm doing this because it's going to get me somewhere. I think you have to really be embedded in and be committed to your here and now. I think a lot of folks sometimes get, we're so caught up in the systems at play today that our need to hustle forward and climb the ladder and get to our end goal and do all these things. It's a process, and you have to embrace it piece by piece by piece by piece, and throw yourself into your current situation, and eventually that current situation is going to evolve and develop when you're doing it right, when you're doing it for good reasons and really in line with your own personal values. And so, fill out all the applications, apply for everything and anything that you can that makes sense, for your situation, that's not going to overextend yourself or cash yourself out. You don't want to burn out either.
Mm.
But, and it's it's piece by piece. Show up at openings, talk to people, be a participant. There's a young man I just wrote a letter of recommendation for, and he just got into grad school. The first time I talked to him, was at an internship opportunity. I was a speaker there. I went, I spoke to the students at the internship during the lunch break. He made sure to come up and talk to me. He showed me the work he was working on then. He told me what he was excited about. That, so like that first, he made an effort to start building that relationship, and I've got to watch him develop over the years. And so when it came time for him to apply for grad school, he had built that relationship with me. I had watched his development because of it. We stayed in touch, and now he's going to grad school, so like that's just an example of like how, you have to be proactive. You have to invest in yourself, and you have to have a real genuine respect for those that are willing to invest their time in you as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Well, I mean, as you're talking, like, I'm just thinking of old lessons learned, and situations of people that have seen those opportunities, and, yeah, it just resonates,
Yeah. Good.
Well, Dyani, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
It's been a great conversation. This exhibition I'm really excited for. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to share? We've gone over quite a bit, so.
Yeah, we've gone over a lot. I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, this is Chiswacha. This is my youngest girl.
Hello.
Wave and say hi. Hi. I hope people can get to the exhibition, and experience the works in person. There's more works in the exhibition that we didn't have the time to talk about today. Yep. But there's a lot of love, put into the work, and I hope that people can feel that and experience that. And, for folks, for our non-Native relatives, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for realization and relationship building, that's built into the language to help folks kind of understand what each piece is asking of you, what you can do to practice being a better relative, a stronger relative, to our Native communities. And yeah, I guess that's the last thing I have to share. Yeah. So
on that note, thank you. The exhibition is called She Gives. It's open through October 3rd. Also, at the Plains Museum, we're doing a podcast called 5 Plain Questions that comes out every Monday. And Dyani, you're one of our guests on an upcoming episode. And so we're really excited about that too. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.